In this video, we're going to take a look at how you can use Cypress to test API endpoints. All this code is open source, and I'll post a link so you can see this for yourselves. In this first example here, we're trying to make a series of requests to this API subscribe endpoint, and we're making an assertion that it can only accept post requests. So I have an array here with different types of requests, and then I'm using .each from Lodash, which Cypress ships with Lodash by default. This is how you would import it into your test. And if we scroll back down, what we're doing is within this each loop, I've got a site.request, and we're making a request to our request type. Our method is from this array to here's our endpoint. And this is something for Cypress specifically. This is going to tell Cypress that when it returns a 400 or an error status code, don't fail the test. And then we're setting it as an alias as get email subscribe. That we're getting our alias. We're making an assertion that the response should equal a 400. So essentially what we're saying here was we're dynamically generating a series of 4 tests, and we want all of these to fail because only a post request should pass. And so if we look at our test, everything passes. In this next example, we are asserting that the API returns a status of 400 if we don't include an email address in the request. So when we do our site.request, we're making a post request. Here's our endpoint, and you'll notice that there's no body and there's no email included. So when we run this test, it fails. In the next request, we are making an assertion that the API endpoint returns a status code of 200 if there is an address included in the request. So the only difference between this one and the one above is now we've got a body property here with an email, and I've got a constant at the top with a string that's tom@aol.com. If we run this test, we can see that it passes. And then there's this final example here. We're using site.intercept to request a post request that goes to the API subscribe endpoint. And then we're actually changing the content type in the request headers to text.html. And the reason why we are doing this is because our endpoint should only be able to accept JSON. So our endpoint is accepting content type application JSON, and we're using site.intercept to modify that to text.html so that we can then throw this error, so that way we can make sure that our endpoint will only accept JSON payloads. And then if we run this test, we see that it passes.